Hello, my name is Ricky, and today I've got worms, bookworms. So I want to tell you whether it's worth it or not to read The Three Musketeers and its sequels. Now, the first thing to know is that The Three Musketeers itself is a long book. This is about a 600-page copy with pretty small font, and I even have an 800-page copy with a little bit bigger font and smaller pages, but still, no matter what you do, it's going to be 600, 700, somewhere in there. It's a long book. It's a meaty one. So that kind of adds to it of, do you really want to make this investment? And to go even further, here are its sequels. See that? That's like a child. This is hefty. And for the record, these last three are 3 volumes that make up one book. So if you're interested in reading this, you're going to get into a 1,800-page, 260-some chapter final novel of this series. So what could possibly make that worth it? Well, for one thing, the thing it's most famous for, adventure. It is exciting. There's a lot of great historical intrigues. You have the Musketeers trying to save the Queen's jewels to save her honor. And you have the Musketeers going to a siege and they hold down a fort all by themselves. And in the second one, they try and save King James from assassination by Cromwell. And there's secret passages and secret treasure. And in the third one, they're, riding their horses as fast as they can. And they're in a collapsing castle trying to escape, all these things. It is super adventurous. Obviously, you can't fill 600 pages with just solid adventure. So if you're really expecting just, boom, 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 adventure, it's not quite that way. But when it does have the adventure, it's classic capital A adventure that won't disappoint. So why else should you read it? Well, if you've never read Dumas loves dialogue. In the final book, the honker one, the big bazooya, I recall when I was reading it feeling like almost every character in the whole book talked at least once to, each and every other character. Dumas pads his books for sure, but he pads it with a lot of dialogue and a lot of witty dialogue and a lot of really intriguing dialogue. So if you like books with lots of dialogue and lots of great character moments and, witty one-liners and especially savage burns like D'Artagnan, the main character, the amount of people he straight up roasts he is constantly roasting people. So it's adventurous, it's funny, it's fun, it's historical. So while it may not be the most historically accurate, if you're, an amateur historian, if you're not someone who knows the history super well, I think you'll love these books because you will learn something. In The Three Musketeers, you learn about who Richelieu was and his relationship with the king and queen and blah, blah, blah. And in the second one, the English Civil War and the Fronde in France. And then in the third one, you have King Louis XIV's rise and the arrest of Nicolas Fouquet and all these things that, in the U.S., I certainly never heard about it. And some of the things like Nicolas Fouquet are really relatively obscure, even in world history. So I think you really get to dive deep a little bit. Now, who would I recommend this for? Well, it's most known for being a children's book, but I would not really recommend it for children. There are some dark things, and especially the main character does something kind of really heinous in this book that I think kind of disqualifies it for being for children. I would recommend this series to adults or older kids, mainly older kids because just of how long it is and the patience needed. And I think if you're a parent, you really should read this yourself first to see what I'm talking about of what D'Artagnan does. If you go on Goodreads and find 1-star ranting reviews, you'll probably find out right away what happens. I will just say it's very strange. But anyways, I would recommend this, I think, to people who like historical epics most. I think if you're looking primarily just for the adventure and fun factor, it is here, but it's not going to get you through 3,000 pages of, historical drama. I think more what you're looking for, if you're looking for an epic, tons of characters that you see through so many years, this series takes place over 30 years. We see almost our main characters' whole lives. We see them have children and, have relationships and get a title and this and that and then blah, blah, blah. It's really an epic, and you see kings rise and fall and wars and betrayal and all the things that makes an epic. But I think if you're looking more for just the story and you're not really interested in the historical aspect, you don't have to be a historian to read these, but I think that carries a lot of weight in getting through how much it is and kind of making it worth it. Is I think if you just have a little interest in history and like sort of that epic storytelling, you're really going to love it. So who's this not for? Well, I would say particularly the Three Musketeers. If you're someone who is kind of easily offended by outdated morals, basically, do not read the Three Musketeers. I think actually, if you wanted to read one of the books, I would recommend 20 Years After. I don't really recall anything super crazy in this. It's a great adventure. I think there's even more kind of classic adventure-y stuff in this than in the Three Musketeers. You'll be a little lost, of course, because you don't know the characters, but it's even longer. I think it's a great place. If you want to just read one, if you kind of want the adventure, I think this is a good way to go. I think if you're going to read the whole series, get through the Three Musketeers and know that it gets sort of more serious, and that the weird stuff that goes down between D'Artagnan and Milady is not really emblematic of the rest of the series. There's nothing like that. If you've read this, you know what I'm talking about. I don't really want to say it, but anyways, it's not really for kids, but if you're going to read the whole thing, read the whole thing. If you've read The Count of Monte Cristo, I think you should try giving the whole series a shot. I think if you just read Three Musketeers, you'll be a little disappointed because it doesn't quite land the whole epicness that the Count of Monte Cristo has in one book. But definitely, as you get further in the series, it's going to capture that feeling, of these characters growing and changing and their friendships and lifelong. It's a great series. I think fantasy lovers would also love this because it's like reading a fantasy, except, it's a real period. When you read or watch something like a fantasy, you get engrossed in the world in a different place. And I think that's exactly what Dumas does here, is you read this adventure and it's in a different place. It's a different time, and it's somewhat recognizable from our reality, but it's also different because it's the past, and people were different and life was different. And I think fantasy lovers would really like this. I think if you're like a fantasy lover who's never really tried historical fiction, I think this would be a great gateway. Now, I think because Dumas, of course, is one of the world's most famous classic writers, if you're somebody who loves classics and sort of on the highbrow scale, if you're, War and Peace and Dickens and all this, I think you'll like this somewhat. There is still sort of the more classical storytelling, and especially the language, that kind of matches those eras. But it's not so, there's not as many social kind of statements and symbolism and things like that. I think this is more like a classic for the reader who reads to have fun. I think if you read to kind of study and learn about literature, this is an important work. This is an important series. It was very popular, but it's not really going to scratch that itch. So in summary, should you read The Three Musketeers and its sequels? You should, if you like historical epics, if you like heroic adventures in an interesting setting, You should not, if you are looking into reading it, because of its classic status and for learning, and you should not if you are easily offended by outdated morals. So overall, it's a great series, but it's not really for everyone. And of course it is long. If you're going to give it a shot, you really need to be honest with yourself about your patience level as a reader. But overall, I think they're wonderful stories. It's a great tale of friendship throughout the years. And I think anybody who reads it will enjoy it if you're willing to put in the time. But of course, not everyone can do that. For an alternative, for another historical adventure that's much shorter, I would recommend Captain Blood by Raphael Sabatini, because it's about 300 pages. It's short. It was definitely written later, more about in the 1900s, I believe, but he definitely has a similar style to Dumas, and he's witty and adventurous like Dumas is, but he writes a lot shorter, but he still seems to be able to capture that sort of epic journey where you feel that the characters have come a long way. I think it's not going to be as moving reading that book compared to reading, these 3,000 page epic where we see all of these beloved characters. But I think that's a good alternative for someone more looking for just classic adventure. So thank you for watching this video. I hope this helped you, decide whether it's worth it to read these books. If not, please leave a comment about any thoughts you have on these books. If you've read these books, I'd love to hear some thoughts, especially about, some of the under-discussed ones, such as 20 Years After. So thank you so much, and please have a great day.